At 72 years old, she'd learned to expect certain routines, certain numbers on these pages. The balance should have shown $150,000, her life savings, carefully accumulated over 45 years of working as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital. Instead, the stark black numbers read $347.82. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. The sound echoed through the silence like a scream. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, each beat louder than the last. She could taste the metallic flavor of fear in her mouth as she read and reread the statement, hoping her eyes were deceiving her. No, 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 she whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached for her reading glasses with shaking hands, wiping the lenses clean before looking again. The numbers remained unchanged. $149,652 had been withdrawn in a single transaction 3 days ago. Margaret's mind raced through possible explanations: bank error, fraud, identity, theft. But deep in her gut, a sickening realization began to form. Only one other person had access to this account: her son, David. She fumbled for her phone, her arthritic fingers struggling with the small buttons. When David finally answered on the 5th ring, his voice carried that familiar tone of mild irritation she'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Morning, Mom. What's up? I'm running late for work." "David," she began, her voice wavering. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Sure. What is it?" Did you take money from our joint account?" The silence on the other end stretched out like an eternity. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, could feel the sweat beginning to form on her palms despite the morning chill. "Mom, I can explain," he finally said, and her heart sank like a stone in water. "Explain?" Margaret's voice cracked. She gripped the kitchen counter, her knuckles turning white. "David, that was everything. Every penny I've saved since I started. Working at 19. Mom, please, just listen to me. Can I come over? This is something I need to explain in person." Against her better judgment, she agreed. 20 minutes later, she heard his car pull into the driveway. Not the 11-year-old Camry she was used to seeing, but something else. Something that purred like an expensive cat. When David opened her front door, he was wearing a new suit. Charcoal gray, clearly tailored with a silk tie that caught the light just right. His usually disheveled appearance had been replaced by something sleek, polished. "Professional." "Mom," he began, settling onto her worn couch with the casual confidence she hadn't seen in years. "I bought a Mercedes." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret steadied herself against the doorframe, trying to process his words. "A Mercedes? With my money?" "Our money, Mom. And yes, but hear me out." He leaned forward, his brown eyes, so like his father's, intense with conviction. "Do you remember when I told you about the promotion opportunity at Hartley & Associates?" She nodded weakly, sinking into her favorite armchair across from him. The fabric felt rough against her skin, suddenly uncomfortable in her own home. "Well, image matters in that world. When I drive up to client meetings in my beat-up Camry, people make assumptions. They wonder if I'm successful enough to handle their accounts. It's not fair, but it's reality. So you stole from me to buy a car for image?" "I didn't steal, Mom. I invested. In our future." He reached across and took her hands, his touch warm, but somehow unfamiliar. "This car, this image, it's already paying dividends. I've landed the Morrison account worth $200,000 in commissions over the next year. We'll have your money back, plus interest within 6 months." Margaret pulled her hands away. She could smell his expensive cologne now, something woody and masculine that made her think of boardrooms and power lunches, worlds she'd never inhabited. "And you couldn't have asked me first?" "I knew you'd worry. You've spent your whole life worrying about money, scraping and saving. I wanted to give you a different life. One where you don't have to check the price of every grocery item twice. His words painted pictures in her mind. Herself in a new car, maybe traveling to see her sister in Vermont, buying Christmas presents without calculating every dollar. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the comfort his vision promised. Besides, David continued, Emily and I have been talking about everything you've sacrificed for me over the years. My college education, helping with the down payment on our house, all those times you worked double shifts so I could go to summer camp. This is my way of paying you back, by setting us all up for real security. Emily, his wife of 3 years. Margaret had always sensed something calculating about the woman, though she'd never voiced it. Now, hearing her name in this context, a chill ran down her spine. Where is Emily in all this? She asked quietly. She's completely supportive. Actually, it was her idea to look into investment opportunities. She has a head for business. Graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, remember? Margaret remembered. She also remembered Emily's subtle comments about the quaint neighborhood her mother-in-law lived in. The pointed glances at Margaret's dated wardrobe during family dinners. The way she'd redirect conversations when Margaret mentioned her years. Working at the hospital. I've always supported your decisions, David, Margaret said slowly, watching her son's face carefully. Even when I disagreed. But this feels different. You took something that wasn't yours to take. Everything I have is because of you, Mom. In a way, it was always yours. He smiled that charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since kindergarten. Trust me on this one. By Christmas, we'll be laughing about how worried you were today. After David left, Margaret sat in the growing darkness of her living room. The statements and documents spread across her coffee table like evidence of a crime. She could hear her neighbor's dog barking, the familiar sound oddly comforting. Her fingers traced the numbers on the bank statement again and again. Trust me, he'd said. Those 2 words echoed in her mind like a prayer and a warning all at once. The days following David's visit blurred together like watercolors in rain. Margaret found herself checking her phone obsessively, waiting for updates on the miraculous returns he'd promised. She'd wake at 3 a.m, anxiety clawing at her chest, and creep to the kitchen to make herbal tea, hoping chamomile could soothe what felt like betrayal. It was during one of these nocturnal rituals, 4 nights after their conversation, that she heard something that would shatter whatever remained of her naive hope. Margaret was in her bathroom, door ajar, when David's phone rang downstairs. He and Emily were staying the night. Their new house was being fumigated, they'd said. Through the thin walls of her modest home, voices carried with cruel clarity. Hello? Emily? A woman's voice, sharp and impatient. Mom, what's wrong? It's after 11. Margaret froze, her toothbrush suspended halfway to her mouth. Emily was talking to her mother. Margaret had met Mrs. Patricia Chen exactly twice, at David and Emily's wedding, and once at a stilted dinner where Patricia had spent the evening checking her phone and making pointed observations about generational wealth. The car worked perfectly. Emily's voice was low but clear. James was impressed at the country club. Everything's falling into place ahead of schedule. Margaret's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She moved closer to the crack in the door, feeling like a spy in her own home. And the old woman? Any problems there? Margaret's easier to handle than I thought. David's got her wrapped around his little finger with the whole investment in our future story. Good. The next phase won't be as simple. I know. But with the car establishing us socially, and David's new image at the firm, we should have everything we need to move forward with the rest of the plan. Margaret's legs felt like water. She gripped the sink for support, cold porcelain biting into her palms. The paperwork? Patricia's voice continued. Almost ready. The nursing home David found is actually pretty nice, considering. She'll think it's temporary while we renovate her house for resale. And she still doesn't know about the inheritance. You discovered? About her former employer? The room spun. Margaret had to sit on the closed toilet lid, fighting waves of nausea. Former employer? Inheritance? What were they talking about? Mrs. Whitmore's estate lawyer contacted David last month. Remember? Apparently, Margaret doesn't even know she's the primary beneficiary. $5 million sitting in a trust, waiting for her. And because David's named as her power of attorney? Exactly. Once we have her in the facility, we'll have legal authority to manage all her assets. The car was just the beginning. Margaret heard Emily's footsteps moving away, the conversation fading as she presumably walked outside for privacy. But Margaret had heard enough. She stumbled back to her bedroom, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret had worked as a private evening nurse for the elderly woman during her last years, even after retiring from the hospital. Mrs. Whitmore had no family, no children. Margaret had held her hand when she died, had been the only person at her small funeral. $5 million. The number felt abstract, impossible. Margaret had never dreamed of such money. But what terrified her more than the money itself was the plan she'd just overheard. A plan that reduced her to an obstacle, a problem to be managed and put away. She lay awake until dawn, listening to her son and daughter-in-law's quiet movements in her guest room, wondering when the boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms had become a stranger. The next morning, after David and Emily left for work, Margaret called in sick to her part-time job at the library, something she hadn't done in 15 years. Her hands shook as she dialed information, requesting the number for Whitmore, Peterson and Associates, the law firm she vaguely remembered Mrs. Whitmore mentioning. Whitmore, Peterson and Associates, this is Jennifer speaking. Yes, hello. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm calling about Elizabeth Whitmore's estate. A pause. One moment, please. The hold music was classical, soothing, completely at odds with Margaret's racing heart. She stared at her kitchen calendar, where David's birthday was circled in red. He'd be 40 next month. When had so many years passed? Mrs. Thompson? This is Harold Peterson. I've been trying to reach you for months. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Mrs. Whitmore was very clear in her final wishes. You were more than just her nurse, weren't you? She spoke of you often. The daughter she never had, she'd say. Margaret felt tears welling up. Mrs. Whitmore had been a brilliant woman, a former judge who'd fought for civil rights in the 60s. They'd spent countless hours discussing literature, history, life. She was very kind to me, kind enough to name you as her primary beneficiary. Mrs. Thompson, you've inherited her entire estate, valued at approximately $5 million. We sent notification to your address of record, but never heard back. The world tilted again. Margaret gripped the phone, her knuckles white. I never received anything. I had no idea. Well, there are some time-sensitive matters we need to discuss. Can you come to our office this afternoon? Say, around 3 o'clock? Margaret agreed, hanging up in a daze. She spent the next hours mechanically cleaning her already spotless apartment, her mind churning. David knew. Emily knew. They'd intercepted her mail, planned her future without her, calculated her worth down to the last Social Security payment. At precisely 3 o'clock, Margaret found herself in a mahogany-paneled office that smelled of old books and expensive leather. Harold Peterson was older than his phone voice suggested, with kind eyes that reminded her of her late husband. Mrs. Whitmore was quite specific about her wishes, he explained, sliding documents across the massive desk. The primary estate goes to you, her investments, real estate, and liquid assets. But there were additional instructions. Additional? He pulled out what appeared to be a handwritten letter. She asked me to give this to you personally, along with some advice she specifically requested I share. Margaret's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Mrs. Whitmore's spidery handwriting across the front read, "For Margaret, when you discover what you truly need to know." "What advice?" Margaret whispered. Mr. Peterson leaned forward, his expression serious. She was aware, Mrs. Thompson, of how certain people might react to such an inheritance. She'd witnessed it in her own family conflicts over the years. Her advice was simple. Guard your heart, but don't harden it. Justice and mercy can coexist. Margaret opened the letter with trembling fingers. Mrs. Whitmore's words swam before her eyes. "My dear Margaret, if Harold is reading you this letter, it means you've finally learned what I've left you. I hope it comes as a surprise but not a burden. You gave me something no amount of money could buy. Genuine care, laughter, and companionship in my final years. Your stories about your son David always made me smile. You were so proud of him. But life has a way of testing our relationships. Money, unfortunately, has a way of revealing people's true characters. If you're reading this, I suspect you've already learned something difficult about those you thought you could trust. Use this gift wisely, not just the money, but the knowledge it brings. Trust your instincts. And remember, the strongest revenge is often not what people expect. With all my love and gratitude, Elizabeth." Margaret folded the letter, her vision blurred with tears. Mr. Peterson had already prepared the first set of documents for her to sign, transferring the initial funds to an account that only she would control. "There's one more thing," he said gently. Mrs. Whitmore included specific instructions about maintaining privacy. The estate won't be public record for another 6 months, giving you time to arrange your affairs as you see fit. On the drive, home, windows cracked to let in the autumn air, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced since her husband died. Pure, clear purpose. The money was staggering, yes, but more than that was the gift of sight. She could see now. Really see. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tonight? Emily's making her famous lasagna. Come hungry?" Margaret smiled. Not the weak, worried smile she'd worn for weeks, but something altogether different. Something that would have made Mrs. Whitmore proud. She texted back, "Can't wait. I have some news to share too." The game, she realized, had only just begun. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret transformed into someone she didn't recognize, a strategist, a master of deception. Each morning, she'd wake before dawn and take long walks through her neighborhood, letting the crisp autumn air clear her mind as she planned her next moves. Her first step was establishing what Mr. Peterson called defensive positions. She opened new accounts at 3 different banks, none of which David had ever used. Each visit required careful timing. She'd arrive right when they opened, wearing sunglasses and a hat she'd never worn before, as if she were conducting covert operations. But her most crucial ally emerged from an unexpected source. Her longtime friend, Dr. Sarah Chen, ironically Emily's aunt, though they'd been close since medical school long before David and Emily had met. "Sarah," Margaret said during their weekly coffee at the diner they'd frequented for 20 years, "I need to ask you something in confidence." Sarah's intelligent eyes searched Margaret's face. "What is it, honey? You look like you've been carrying the world." Margaret outlined everything, the stolen savings, the overheard conversation, the hidden inheritance. Sarah's expression shifted from shock to anger to something resembling admiration. "My sister Patty has always been calculating," Sarah said carefully. "And Emily, she takes after her mother in all the worst ways. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they want, and everything they don't." Sarah smiled, a knowing look passing between them. "How can I help?" Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Sarah would casually mention to Emily at an upcoming family dinner that Margaret had been taking memory supplements, seemed increasingly forgetful during their coffee dates. Nothing dramatic, just enough concern to plant seeds. Meanwhile, Margaret began leaving strategic breadcrumbs in her apartment for David's eyes during his increasingly frequent visits. Bills marked "Final Notice" that she'd create herself. A brochure for a low-cost retirement community that she'd strategically place where Emily would spot it while helping in the kitchen. But the masterpiece was the journal. Margaret had always kept a diary, but now she crafted entries knowing they might be read. She wrote about feeling overwhelmed with her finances, grateful for David's investment wisdom, and increasingly concerned about her memory lapses. She left it open on her kitchen table, pages fluttering in the breeze from her perpetually cracked window. The true brilliance came from Sarah's professional connections. She introduced Margaret to Dr. James Hartwell, a gerontologist who specialized in elder care planning. Together, they developed documentation showing that Margaret had undergone cognitive assessments and was beginning to show mild impairment. "This gives you legal protection," Dr. Hartwell explained during one of their secret meetings at his office. "If anyone questions your mental capacity later, we have a paper trail showing you were of sound mind when making all subsequent decisions." 3. Weeks into her campaign, David began treating her differently. His patience stretched thinner, his explanations simplified as if speaking to a child. Emily started bringing pre-printed documents for simple financial planning, papers that Margaret signed with deliberately shaky handwriting, knowing full well they were attempts to establish power of attorney. The breakthrough came on a Sunday evening. Margaret was preparing tea when she overheard David on a phone call in her living room. "She's declining faster than we thought. Yes, I'm her power of attorney. It's all legal. Next month, November 1st, the place in Evanston has an opening. We'll tell her it's temporary, just while the house is being renovated for sale." No, she won't resist. She doesn't even remember where she put her bills anymore. Margaret's hands remained steady as she arranged cookies on a plate. November 1st. They'd chosen her birthday to move her into the facility. That night, alone in her apartment, she sat in her worn armchair and opened Mrs. Whitmore's letter again. The last lines seemed to glow in the lamplight. "The strongest revenge is often not what people expect." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. October 31st would indeed be memorable, just not in the way David and Emily anticipated. Halloween morning arrived with an unexpected warmth, Indian summer making one final appearance before winter's grasp. Margaret woke at 5, as had become her habit, and began her final preparations. Today would be her 73rd birthday eve, the last day of the old Margaret Thompson. She dressed with particular care, a navy blouse with small white flowers, a cardigan she'd knitted herself years ago, and the pearl earrings Richard had given her for their 20th anniversary. In the mirror, she looked like any other elderly woman preparing for a family gathering. No one would suspect the chess master behind those gentle eyes. The doorbell rang at precisely 4 o'clock. David arrived first, alone, carrying a bouquet of chrysanthemums that still had the grocery store price tag attached. "Emily's bringing dinner," he explained, kissing her cheek. His aftershave was different, more expensive, she noted. The profits from her savings apparently extended beyond the Mercedes. "How have you been feeling, Mom? Any more episodes?" "Episodes?" Margaret asked innocently, playing her role perfectly. "You know, the memory things. Emily mentioned you seemed confused when she called yesterday about the tax documents." Margaret blinked slowly, letting a shadow of uncertainty cross her face. "Oh, did I sign those papers she brought? I can't quite remember." David's expression softened into something that might have been pity if it weren't tinged with satisfaction. "Don't worry about it. We're taking care of everything." Emily arrived 30 minutes later, bearing a casserole dish and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Happy early birthday, Margaret. How are you feeling today?" "Oh, fine, dear. though I woke up this morning and couldn't remember what day it was for the longest time. Emily and David exchanged a look. Quick, meaningful, calculated. Margaret caught it all while pretending to fuss with the table settings. Dinner began with practiced normalcy. Emily's lasagna was, admittedly, excellent. The conversation flowed around safe topics: work, weather, holiday plans. But Margaret could feel the weight of unspoken intentions hovering over the table like storm clouds. Finally, as they moved to coffee and the birthday cake Emily had thoughtfully brought, David cleared his throat. "Mom, Emily and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to discuss your future." Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. "My future? Your comfort? Your care?" Emily said smoothly. "We've been researching some wonderful places that specialize in helping people who are experiencing memory challenges." "I'm not," Margaret began, then let her voice trail off uncertainly. "We found a beautiful facility in Evanston," David continued. "It's more like a resort than a nursing home. They have activities, great food, professional staff. And the best part is, it's just temporary while we fix up this house to make it safer for you." "Fix up?" Margaret whispered. "But this is my home." "We know how much you love it," Emily soothed. "That's why we're going to invest in proper renovations. Rails, better lighting, a security system. We want you to come back to a house that keeps you safe." Margaret looked around her modest dining room, at the wallpaper Richard had helped her hang, the china cabinet inherited from her mother, the windows that caught the afternoon light just right. When would this happen?" "Tomorrow, actually," David said gently. "The timing worked out perfectly with their availability and the contractor's schedule. We've already packed a bag for you, just enough for a few days." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Margaret's vision blurred, and for a moment, she wondered if the performance had become too real. Then she felt the sharp outline of Mrs. Whitmore's letter in her cardigan pocket, and strength returned.